This is a 2017 Fiat 124 Spider Abarth, and it's Fiat's version of the Mazda Miata. And I don't mean that Fiat made a sports car to compete with the Mazda Miata. I mean, this is literally Fiat's version of the Mazda Miata. They basically share an interior, they share a chassis, they share a lot of parts under the skin, and they're made on the same production line in Japan. Today, I'm going to show you why Fiat has not built a better Miata or a worse Miata, but rather a different Miata. I've borrowed this car from a viewer here in the Washington, D.C. area, and I'm going to start by showing you around the 124 Abarth. And of course, I'm going to show you all of its unique quirks and its weird features. And then I'm going to get it out on the road and find out how it drives. And then I'm going to give it a Doug score. And for more of my thoughts on the 124 Abarth experience, click the link below to go to autotrader.com/oversteer. Before I get into the quirks and features, I'll start with the most obvious thing, the biggest difference between the Abarth, or the Fiata as it's called by all the cool kids, and also Tyler Hoover, and the Miata. The Miata uses a 155 horsepower 2-liter 4-cylinder, but the Abarth uses a 1.4-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder with 164 horsepower. But the biggest difference is the torque. While the Miata only has 148 pound-feet of torque, the Abarth has 184 pound-feet, an increase of 36 pound-feet of torque. More on that in a minute when I get behind the wheel. Obviously, the other big difference between the two cars is the styling.
To me, the main difference is this. The Fiat has more of a traditional classic roadster look, while the Miata is more modern and daring and futuristic. More specifically, here's what the Fiat looks like in front, and here's the Miata. Here's the Fiat from the side, and here's the Miata. And here's the Fiat from the back, and here's the Miata.
Now, you hear a lot of opinions about whether this car is more or less attractive than the Miata, and I will leave that for you to decide, but I will say there's one thing on the exterior of this car that I really don't like, and that is right here, this line in the middle of the front fender. I saw this car for the first time at an auto show, and I remember walking up to it and thinking, is that line real? That panel gap right in the middle of the fender? And indeed, it is real. I've never seen a line this obvious in any other car or this far back in the fender, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Every time you see a Fiata from now on, you will see that line. Now, the other thing about that line is that it separates the plastic front bumper from the metal fender panel, and so if you look closely at it, you can see differences in color on either side of the line, which only makes it even more obvious. Now, I'll move back to the exterior in a second, but for now I'm going to start on the interior. And the biggest thing you notice the second you climb inside the 124, if you've spent any time in the Miata, and that is just how much stuff is shared. Basically all of it. The steering wheel is the same, the turn signal stock is the same, the wiper stock is the same, the climate controls, the vents, the infotainment screen, the parking brake, it's all carried over. And it's just crazy to see if you've been around the Miata, look at all that stuff that's borrowed right out of the Miata, but then it says Fiat on the steering wheel. Another thing you notice when you climb into the interior, the center climate control vent is placed right next to the hazard light switch, and strangely enough, they're about the same size. I've never seen this before, a climate control vent the same size as a hazard light switch. Then again, maybe it's nice to have a big hazard light switch in an Italian car. Another interesting thing about the interior, if you look in the center console, there's no cup holders. That's because they're behind you, they're directly between the seats, and you put your cups in it, you can drink out of them, but that's not a very convenient place for a cup holder, so you can move them. Check this out, you can detach the cup holder from behind the middle of the seats, and you can attach it on the side of the center console, but only one of the cup holders is designed to be attached that way. The cup holder on the driver's side is angled in the wrong direction, and so it doesn't fit over there. Nonetheless, that is a pretty cool idea. Movable cup holders. I bet your car doesn't have that. And since I'm on the middle of the interior, we gotta talk about the infotainment system, and my favorite infotainment quirk, every 124 Spider is navigation ready, but you have to pay extra, $500 extra, to get the official Fiat part to give your car an actual navigation system. The owner of this car told me he spent $150 on Amazon for the part and just installed it himself, and now he has a navigation system. That's just a little Easter egg in case you were thinking about buying a 124 Spider and you were thinking about maybe springing for navigation. You don't have to, and if you've already bought one and you've already paid the $500 for navigation, well, oops. Another interesting thing about navigation, even though the car isn't equipped with navigation, but it's navigation ready until you install that card, it flashes a little warning message when you try to go over to the navigation tab and says, your car is not equipped with navigation, visit dealer, to try to get you to spend that $500. And just to tease you to get the navigation, it gives you your latitude and longitude, letting you know you could have navigation, but you don't. Couple of other interesting things in the infotainment system. Now in some cars you have a day mode and a night mode, and it changes the background color to make it more readable at night. In this car, the day mode is just the normal brightness, and then you put it on night mode and it becomes unreadable. It's just really dim. It doesn't change the background color or anything, it just dims it to the point where you can't see it. Put it back in day mode and you can read it again, then night mode, it's dim again. It makes no sense. It's the chintziest night mode I've ever seen on an infotainment system. Something else I like about the infotainment system, when you go into the settings menu, you see all sorts of different settings for the car and for the sound system and various other things, and then you go to safety and there's nothing. There's just a tab and you can't make any adjustments. There are no safety settings. Good luck in a collision. Now, speaking of infotainment system settings, this car has all the usual ones: interior lighting, exterior lighting, chimes. All these cars are super configurable these days, but this car has something I haven't seen in a lot of other ones. That would be turn signal volume. You can have it on low, and you can have it on high. Interestingly, there's no real difference between the two. Here's low, and now here's high. Interestingly, the high setting is still really quiet. If only there was a super high. And one final interesting infotainment system quirk: if you go into the Applications tab and go under Warning Guidance, the car will tell you if you have any warnings. Fortunately, right now there are no warnings found. I guess that's a good thing. Another interesting thing about the Fiat, it has no glove box, or at least it has no glove box in the normal place. Instead, the glove box in this car is in between the seats, and it's massive. I can't believe how big this is. I've seen these in between the seat storage solutions before, and they're usually pretty tiny. You can barely get an insurance card in there, but in this thing, look at this. I can get an entire paperback book inside, and a lot of other stuff too. And speaking of storage, this car also has another interesting storage compartment beyond the center glove box, and it's behind the seats. You gotta fold the seat forward, and there's a hidden compartment back here that you can open up and put stuff in. There's one on both sides, behind the passenger seat and behind the driver's seat. Now, the car's owner didn't even know that little compartment was back there until we started poking around looking for quirks and features, so most people would have no idea that little hidden compartment is back there, unless they've seen this video. Another interesting thing in the interior, that would be the sun visors, which are very oddly shaped. It's like they have no backing to them, and it's like the mirror is just grafted on. I especially like the driver sun visor because it still has the little inspection sticker from the person in Japan who last inspected this Italian car. And since I'm poking around on the top of the windshield, I might as well talk about the roof of this car. I recently reviewed a convertible and I didn't put the top up or down, and you people got very angry, so here goes. To put the top up in this car, you grab onto this latch in the middle of the interior, the top lifts forward, and then all you gotta do, look at that, it's so simple. Boom, and now the top is closed. How easy. And so then we have to talk about opening the tab. Now, one of the advantages of the Miata has always been that if it's a sunny day, or if it becomes a sunny day while you're driving and you're sitting at a stoplight, you can just open the top quickly without having to get out of the car like in some convertibles, and that is still true in this car. You just have to do a little latchy thing here, push the top back, and it's off. And now I can drive around. It's 2 seconds. You can drive around with the top down. That, it might not be a power top, but that is the next best thing. Next up, we got to talk about another interesting thing on the exterior of this car, and that would be the Abarth badges. They're gigantic. They're like the size of my hand, which is odd for a car this small, and also they're placed on some sort of black plastic backing. The front one doesn't look that out of place, but look at the one on the trunk. It's oddly large for this vehicle. Another interesting thing is the turn signals. Now, the turn signals are inside the brake light, and inside the turn signal is a little body-colored strip. Interesting thing about the turn signal is the size of them sort of depends on what angle you're looking at them from. Dead on from the back where you're seeing it right now, it looks like it's only this part, but if you come to the side, it looks like it's lighting up the entire light. Another interesting thing about the Abarth, even though this car has only 4 cylinders, it also has 4 exhaust pipes, which may seem like overkill, but it does sound pretty good. And the final interesting exterior quirk on the 124 Spider, that would be badging. We'll start with the badging on the windows. It all says Mopar on it, because ultimately at its heart this is a Fiat Chrysler product, and so the windows apparently were all Mopar windows. You get the same Mopar badge you would on a Dodge Grand Caravan. The windshield has it and the side windows have it, and under the hood it also says Mopar very, very distinctly. I have no idea why they didn't change it to just say Fiat, but they didn't. It says Mopar. Now, if you look all around this car, you'll be hard-pressed to find a Mazda badge anywhere, even though they built it. But if you look in the door jamb, you can see that it says that it was manufactured by Mazda. And if you look under the hood, you can find one little tiny Mazda badge, but those are the only 2 places we found them. The badge you won't find on this car, Fiat. It doesn't say Fiat anywhere on the exterior of this car. The only Fiat badge in this car is on the steering wheel. That's it. Otherwise, it just says Abarth. So those are the 124 Abarth's unusual features and quirks. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives compared to the latest Miata. Okay, so the first thing I noticed, it's pretty tight in here. So I'm 6'3" or 6'4" if you believe that video about how tall I am. And I don't have a lot of room. I got the seat all the way back and my knees are right up against the thing. I even despite my height, I get into cars and I don't have a problem, but in this car it is pretty tight. It's pretty quick. In terms of the Miata, it actually feels about the same. The difference is the way that the power comes on in this car. Because it's turbocharged, it really has sort of that old school turbo type feel to it, where it kind of comes on at later and later in the rev range. It kind of kicks you in the face, which I personally like. People who prefer more linear power delivery will probably prefer the Miata. Sport mode instantly, the throttle response is a lot sharper in sport mode. Whoa! Ooh, feels nice. Surprised how quick this car is, and how quick the Miata is, but this car clearly feels a little bit quicker. Now, we were filming the car, and a couple people came up to us while we were filming, and the first question is, what is that? There's no badges on it that make it obvious what it is, and so people think that it's anything. Abarth, they don't know what that means, but everybody thinks it's a more expensive car than it is. They think it's an Alfa. Is it like a Lamborghini, someone asked, because they just don't know. Now, I've read and I know that this car isn't dramatically faster than the Miata. In fact, some people are saying that it might be just a little bit slower. However, one thing I will say to this car's credit is that because of the way the turbocharger comes on, it sort of gives you a little bit more of a thrill. It's less linear and it kind of kicks you in the face a little bit more. And the sound is certainly greater than it is in the Miata, so you almost feel like you're going a little bit faster. Sitting at the stoplight, the car feels reasonably quiet and comfortable. It's not shaking or anything like that, like probably the old 124 Spiders do when they're at a stoplight. The air conditioning works, everything seems reasonable. Now, if you're buying this car because you think it'll sound like the 500 Abarth, unfortunately, you'll probably be disappointed. It does not. It definitely sounds a little bit more throaty and muscular than a Miata, and obviously more than virtually every other four-cylinder car, but it doesn't have that sound that the 500 Abarth does with the crackles and the pops, and I mean, that thing is one of the great sounding four-cylinder cars ever. Downshifting rev matching is super easy. I love how tight the shifter is. It feels great. It just feels really, really good. This is how car shifters should feel. And of course, the clutch is really light, it's a small engine, etc. So it makes it pretty easy to kind of upshift, downshift, throw around. And of course, the size of the car goads you into wanting to, experience that and go faster and go into corners faster. One interesting point is, a lot of people are there's a debate, what's better, the Miata or the Fiat? But one thing worth noting is, they're both better than virtually everything else. And there's just not that many cars in this segment anymore. If you want these cars, it's nice that they both exist, there's not that many more options. Personally, I vastly prefer convertibles to coupes, so I would buy this over a BRZ or an FRS, which is probably sacrilege on internet forums. But I don't take the car on the track all that often, so the rigidity doesn't matter to me that much, but having the top down on a nice day like this, on this winding road, I mean, it's perfect. Yeah, the downshifts are just so easy. It makes it so easy to shift. It's such a relief coming off, bragging, but driving 80s exotic cars, right? Like the heavy clutch and they're all gated, so you have to look where you're shifting. This car, it makes it so easy. It's the kind of car you want to learn to drive stick on because it's easy to drive, but also it's just the kind of car you want to take down a back road and have fun with.
I'm sorry about the audio quality. My computer says it couldn't find the microphone audio from this drive, so that's just the sound in the car. It gets worse from there, so I'll sum up the rest of the drive for you. I then took the car on some twisty back roads, and I decided it's especially great for that, no surprise. The biggest takeaway is that this car isn't a cruiser. It's not a car for long trips or highway drives because it's tight inside and sort of frenetic, but it's so perfect and so wonderfully in its element on back roads, both because it handles so well and because you can really use the whole car and all the engine and rev it up to the top of each gear. The handling is seriously sweet, and while I'm not going to pretend my palate is so refined that I can tell if it's just ever so slightly better than the Miata or worse than the Miata, I will say there's no doubt that these are still some of the most fun little cars you can buy, especially for the money. And with that, on to the Doug score. Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the 124 Abarth is nice looking, better than average, but it's not some stunning supercar, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Acceleration is fine. It does 0 to 60 in about 6.5 seconds, which lands at a 3 out of 10 on the Doug score acceleration scale. Handling is good, very sharp and crisp and predictable with great steering feel, and it gets a 7 out of 10, which is a great score for such a relatively inexpensive car. Cool factor is a bit lower. This is a cool car, sure, but as it becomes more common, it's already starting to get familiar, and at the end of the day, it's a 4-cylinder vehicle based on the Miata, so I have a hard time giving it more than a 5 out of 10. Finally, there's importance. This car isn't particularly significant to the car world, especially long-term, but it's more significant than most everyday cars on account of the fact that it's a rear-wheel drive sports car, and it'll likely have a long career being modified for track and autocross use as the years go on. It gets a 4 out of 10, bringing the total weekend score to 25 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories, starting with features. The 124 is reasonably well equipped, but it's missing most of today's top technology. Some of that stuff is optional and could bump up its score a little higher, but this car isn't about features, and I wouldn't select every single extra. Equipped this way, it gets a 5 out of 10. Comfort is reasonably good. The ride is a little harsh, but not terrible. The seats are nice, but interior space is tight, especially for taller drivers, so it gets a 5 out of 10. Quality is reasonably good. The interior feels pretty nice, but obviously this isn't some high-end luxury car, and I do worry a bit about long-term reliability. It gets a 6 out of 10. Practicality is rough. It has less than 5 cubic feet of cargo volume and only 2 seats, and that earns it just a 2 out of 10. Finally, there's value, which is reasonably strong. The 124 Abarth starts around $26,000, and it's a lot of fun for the money, especially considering you get a brand new car with a long warranty, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Add it all up, and the total daily score is 25 out of 50. Add up the weekend and the daily scores, and the total Doug score is 50 out of 100. That's exactly where it belongs, right in the middle. A great example of a fun car that lands directly between the best exotic supercars I review and normal, boring, average, everyday cars.